The table was already set, every plate in place, every chair pulled out like I still believed someone would walk through that door. I checked my phone again, even though I knew there'd be nothing new. Just that one message sitting there like a verdict. "Something came up, Dad." No call, no explanation. Just 8 words that wiped out 2 months of planning like it meant nothing. The roast was still warm, the candles were ready to be lit, and I stood there in a silent house, realizing I hadn't been forgotten by accident. I'd been set aside on purpose. I live in Columbus, Ohio, in the same brick house my wife and I bought back in 1983, when the neighborhood still had kids on bicycles and people who waved from their porches. My wife, Ellen, has been gone 11 years now. Since then, birthdays got smaller, quieter, but 70 felt different. Not because I needed a fuss, but because I thought maybe this one would mean something to my son. Maybe age makes a man foolish that way. He starts mistaking hope for evidence. I started planning in June. Reservation canceled so I could cook myself, because Daniel always said restaurant food felt cold. I polished the good silver, bought the kind of bourbon he likes but never brings. Even set out the old photo albums in the den, thinking maybe after dinner we'd sit down and remember when life didn't feel so strained between us. I told myself this wasn't about fixing anything, but that was a lie. Every dish I made was an apology for things I never understood how to say. Daniel used to call every Sunday. Then it became every other week. Then holidays. Then mostly texts, always short, always rushed, usually when he needed something. Money for a school trip for my granddaughter, Ava, help with a car repair, a bridge loan when his wife, Melissa, had a payroll delay at her business. I gave it because that's what fathers do when they're trying not to lose their children twice. Once to adulthood, and once to resentment. The last time he came over, he walked through my kitchen like a man inspecting a rental property. He looked at the wallpaper Ellen picked out before she got sick and said, "You ever think about selling this place, Dad? It's too much house for one person." Not, "How are you holding up in here?" Not, "Do you get lonely?" Just numbers, square footage, market value. I laughed it off then, but something in his face stayed with me. He wasn't looking at my home. He was measuring what would be left when I was gone. At 7:14, with the potatoes drying out and the candles burned halfway down, my phone lit up again. For 1 second, I thought it was Daniel finally doing the decent thing. It was Melissa. And what she wrote told me this night had been planned long before I ever set the table. Melissa's message wasn't long. It didn't need to be. Daniel thought it would be better not to come tonight. Ava has something important in the morning, and honestly, this kind of dinner just puts pressure on everyone. I read it twice, then a third time, slower, like maybe the meaning would soften if I gave it enough patience. It didn't. That word sat there heavier than anything else. Pressure, like I was some obligation. Like showing up for your father turning 70 was the same as attending a meeting you couldn't get out of. I called Daniel, not because I expected him to answer, just because some part of me still believed a voice might fix what a message had already broken. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. His voice came on, cheerful, casual. "Hey, it's Daniel. Leave a message." I didn't. Instead, I stood there in my kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock Ellen insisted on keeping even after it started running a little fast. Funny thing, when a house goes quiet like that, every small sound feels louder. Like it's reminding you that something's missing. I turned the stove off, covered the food, went to the dining room and sat down at the head of the table. My place. The same place I'd sat at every family dinner for nearly 40 years. For a moment, I almost convinced myself they might still walk in late. That maybe traffic held them up, or Ava got sick, or something real happened. But that message didn't sound like something real had happened. It sounded rehearsed, clean, thought out. I reached over and picked up the small gift box I'd wrapped for Ava. Nothing fancy, just a silver bracelet with her initials engraved on the inside. I'd spent an hour at the jeweler making sure they got it right. She's 15 now, growing up faster than I can keep track of. I wanted her to have something that lasted longer than a birthday dinner her father couldn't bother attending. I turned the box over in my hands, then set it back down exactly where it had been. Untouched, like everything else on that table. Around 8 o'clock, I poured myself a glass of that bourbon I'd bought for Daniel. It burned more than I expected. Or maybe I just wasn't used to drinking alone anymore. Ellen used to sit across from me with her tea, watching me like she knew exactly when I was pretending to be fine. "You don't have to carry everything by yourself," she told me once, years ago, back when Daniel first started pulling away. I thought about that as I looked at my phone again. Still nothing from him. Not even a follow-up. Not even a sorry. That's when something shifted. Not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet. Like a door inside me closing without a sound. Because Melissa's message wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what came after it. Another text. Not meant for me. I stared at the screen for a long time before I opened it. Like I already knew I wasn't supposed to see it. Like some part of me understood that once I read those words, there wouldn't be any going back to the version of things I'd been holding on to. It was from Daniel, but it wasn't meant for me. Just tell him something came up. I don't have the energy for his guilt tonight. I read it once, then again, slower. Every word landing harder than the last. Not confusion, not stress, not even obligation. Guilt. That's what I was to him. I sat there in the dim light of the dining room, the candles burning lower, wax folding in on itself like it was giving up. And I realized something I hadn't been willing to admit for a long time. This hadn't started tonight. This wasn't about a missed dinner. This was years in the making. I thought back to the first time he pulled away in a way that felt different. Not distance, but intention. It was after Ellen's funeral. People filled the house that day. Neighbors, old friends, casseroles stacked on every surface. Daniel stood beside me at the service, quiet, composed. He even put a hand on my shoulder once, just for a moment. But 3 days later, he was gone. Said work needed him back in Chicago. Said Melissa couldn't stay longer. Said Ava had school. All reasonable things. All things I nodded along to like a man who didn't want to beg his own son to stay one more night in a house that suddenly felt too large. After that, the visits got shorter, then transactional. He'd sit at that same table, barely touching the food, checking his phone between sentences. Conversations turned into updates, not shared moments, just information being passed like paperwork. Melissa's expanding the business. Ava needs a new laptop. We're thinking about private school. Always something, always a need. And every time I filled it, not because I had to, but because I thought it kept the door open. I thought if I stayed useful, I'd stay close. I see now how wrong that was. I picked up my glass and took another sip, my hand steady in a way that surprised me. The hurt was there, sharp, deep, but underneath it, something colder was starting to take shape. Something clearer. Because that message, it wasn't written in anger. It wasn't said in a moment of frustration. It was honest. And honesty, even when it cuts, has a way of stripping everything down to what's real. I stood up from the table and walked slowly into the living room. The house felt different now. Not emptier, just revealed. Like I was seeing it without the stories I'd been telling myself to make things easier. On the shelf near the window sat a framed photo of Daniel at 12 years old. Baseball uniform, dirt on his knees, smiling like the world hadn't taught him how to measure people yet. I picked it up, ran my thumb across the glass. "I didn't raise you to see me this way," I said quietly, not expecting an answer. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a call. And when I looked at the screen and saw who it was, I almost didn't answer. I let it ring twice, maybe 3 times, long enough to prove to myself I still had a choice in the matter. Then I answered. "Hello?" There was a pause on the other end, Not static, not hesitation exactly. Just silence that felt heavy, like whoever was there wasn't sure how to begin. "Dad!" Ava's voice came through softer than I remembered. Careful. I sat down slowly in Ellen's old chair. "Hey, sweetheart." Another pause. I could hear movement behind her. A door closing maybe. Like she'd stepped somewhere private just to make the call. "Are you okay?" she asked. Funny question. Simple, direct. And somehow it cut deeper than anything else that night. "I'm fine," I said, the way people my age always say it when it's the easiest lie available. She didn't answer right away. I could almost picture her, standing there, phone pressed to her ear, not quite believing me. "Dad said you had dinner planned," she said finally. "He said you understood." I let out a slow breath. "Did he?" "Yeah," she hesitated. "He said you didn't want a big thing, that it was better to do something later." I closed my eyes for a moment. Not out of anger. Just to steady myself. "That's not exactly how it went," I said. There was a shift in her breathing. Subtle, but enough. She knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to feel the edges of it. "I wanted to come," she said quickly. "I told him we should go. I even got you something." Her voice trailed off. I looked back toward the dining room, at the empty chairs, the untouched plates. "You don't have to explain anything to me, Ava." "Yes, I do," she said, firmer now. "Because this isn't right." That word again. Not guilt, not pressure. Right. It sat differently. I swallowed, feeling something tighten in my chest. "Where are you right now?" "At home. They're downstairs." He's been on the phone all night." "About what?" She hesitated again. Longer this time. "I think money," she said quietly. "Something about a payment that didn't go through. Mom was yelling earlier. I've never heard her like that." I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. A slow, familiar pattern was starting to come into focus. One I'd ignored more times than I could count. "When did that start?" I asked. "Tonight," she said. "Right after dinner time." Of course it did. I rubbed my forehead, the pieces settling into place whether I wanted them to or not. "Ava, did your dad say anything else about why he didn't come?" She was quiet. Then, almost reluctantly, "He said you'd make him feel bad, that you always do." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Not sharp, not angry, just tired. "I see." "I don't," she said. "I don't understand how visiting your dad makes someone feel bad." There it was again. That clarity. The kind you don't lose until life teaches you how to complicate everything. I looked down at my hands. Old hands now. Steady, but not as strong as they used to be. "Sometimes people confuse responsibility with burden," I said slowly. "And after a while, they stop seeing the difference." "That's not fair," she said. "No," I agreed. "It's not." We sat in silence for a moment. Not uncomfortable. Just full. "Can I come see you tomorrow?" she asked suddenly. I opened my mouth to answer, and then stopped. Because at that exact moment, another call started coming through. Daniel. His name lit up on the screen. Persistent, insistent. And for the first time in my life, I let my son's call go unanswered. I watched his name disappear from the screen, then light up again almost immediately. Daniel wasn't the kind of man who waited. Not anymore. When something slipped out of his control, he rushed to grab it back. "Ava," I said quietly, "I need to call you back." "Is it him?" she asked. "Yes." She didn't argue. "Okay, but promise you'll talk to me." "I promise." I ended the call, let the phone sit in my hand for a second, then answered. "What?" My voice came out calmer than I expected. "Dad, what the hell did you do?" Daniel's voice snapped through the line, sharp, breathless. No greeting, no hesitation. I leaned back in the chair. Good evening to you too. Don't do that, he said quickly. Not tonight. I just got off the phone with the bank. Payments bounced, the mortgage, the car, everything. They said the transfers stopped. I closed my eyes for a moment. There it was. Not concern, not regret, just the money. I assume they told you who set those transfers up in the first place, I said. A pause. Short, but telling. Yeah, I know it was you, he said. That's not the point. The point is you cut it off without saying a word. I said plenty tonight, I replied. You just didn't come to hear it. He exhaled hard, pacing on the other end. I could hear it in the rhythm of his steps. Dad, this isn't funny. We have obligations, real ones. Ava's school, Melissa's business. Your life, I interrupted gently. You mean your life. Another pause. Longer this time. You've been supporting us for years, he said, voice tightening. You can't just stop like that, not over something like a dinner. I let that settle between us. Do you really believe that? I asked. What else am I supposed to think? He shot back. You're punishing us because we missed one night? I stood up slowly and walked back toward the dining room. The candles had burned almost all the way down now, small, flickering stubs. This didn't start tonight, I said, and it's not about dinner. Then what is it about? He demanded. I looked at the empty chair across from mine, the one I'd set for him. It's about the message you sent, I said quietly. Silence, not confusion, not denial, recognition. You weren't supposed to see that, he said finally. No, I agreed, but I did. He let out a breath. Slower this time. Measured, like he was adjusting. Dad, I didn't mean it like that. I almost smiled. I'd heard that sentence before. Different years, different situations, same shape. How did you mean it? I asked. No answer. Just the faint sound of him shifting the phone, maybe rubbing his face. I was tired, he said after a moment. It's been a long week. There's a lot going on, and I didn't have the energy for a whole thing tonight. A whole thing, I repeated. You know what I mean. I do, I said. That's the problem. His voice sharpened again. So what? You're just done? You're cutting us off completely? I ran my hand along the back of the chair, feeling the wood, steady and familiar. I spent 2 months preparing for tonight, I said. Not because I needed a celebration, but because I thought maybe we could sit in the same room and remember how to be a family. We are a family, he snapped. No, I said softly. We're a transaction. That landed. I could hear it. You're overreacting, he said, but there was less force behind it now. Am I? I asked. Tell me something, Daniel. If I stopped sending money 5 years ago, how often would you have called me? He didn't answer. You measure me by what I provide, I continued, and tonight proved something I've been avoiding for a long time. Which is what? I looked down at the table, at the place settings that would never be used. That if I take the money out of the equation, I said slowly, there's nothing left that brings you through that door. The line went quiet, not disconnected, just empty. And when he finally spoke again, his voice had changed. Not angry anymore, just cold. Then I guess we both know where we stand. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't just about money to him. It never had been. I stood there with the phone still in my hand, listening to nothing. No click, no goodbye. Just that quiet, open line until he finally ended it himself. For a long moment, I didn't move. The house felt different now. Not heavy, not even sad, just still, like something that had been stretched too tight for too long had finally snapped and settled into its natural shape. I walked back to the table and sat down again. Same chair, same place, but it didn't feel like waiting anymore. It felt like ending. I reached for my glass, took a slow sip, then set it down carefully beside the plate that had gone cold hours ago. Across from me, his chair stayed empty, not in a temporary way, not like someone running late. Empty in a way that didn't expect to be filled again. My phone buzzed once more on the table. A message, not from Daniel, from Ava. "I'm coming tomorrow. I don't care what they say." I looked at it, read it twice, then turned the phone face down without answering. Not because I didn't want to see her, but because something in me knew tomorrow wasn't going to be simple anymore. Nothing was. I pushed my chair back and stood up slowly, my knees stiff, my hands steady. I started clearing the table one plate at a time. No rush, no frustration, just the quiet rhythm of it, like I'd done 1,000 nights before. Except this time, there was no one else to think about, no expectations to hold up, no one to wait for. When I reached his place setting, I stopped. The plate was still perfect, untouched. The fork exactly where I'd placed it. The napkin folded the way Ellen used to do it. Small, careful triangles. I stood there for a while, then picked it up. Not gently, not angrily either. Just final. Carried it into the kitchen, set it in the sink, turned the water on. The sound filled the silence. For the first time that night, I didn't feel like checking my phone. I didn't feel like hoping. I didn't feel like explaining anything to anyone. I just stood there, sleeves rolled up, watching the water run over something that had already been decided long before this day ever came. And somewhere behind me, in that quiet house, the front door unlocked. If this story meant something to you, subscribe. There's more to come.